The last box, labeled Kitchen Fragile, landed on the counter with a soft thud, the final note in the day's symphony of chaos. A fine layer of dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun, and the air smelled of cardboard and new beginnings. I pulled Sarah close, feeling the pleasant weariness in her body as she leaned into me. "Welcome home, Mrs. Henderson," I whispered into her hair. She tilted her head up, her smile erasing the fatigue from her face. "It still doesn't feel real, Mark. Our own place. No more landlords, no more shared walls." Her gaze swept across the cardboard fortress that was our living room, seeing not the mess, but the potential. "We can paint this wall a sage green," she mused, "and my reading chair will go right there in that patch of sunlight." We knew about the HOA, of course. The binder had been waiting for us at closing, a formidable tome of rules and regulations. We'd flipped through it one night over pizza, laughing at the absurdly specific prohibitions. Not just on pink flamingos, but on any non-indigenous garden ornamentation. And the strict mandate that trash bins could not see the light of day except for designated collection hours. It seemed like a tedious but harmless price to pay for a well-kept neighborhood. How bad could it be? We were reasonable people. The sound of the doorbell was a sharp, unwelcome intrusion on our bubble of contentment. I remember exchanging a curious glance with Sarah. We weren't expecting anyone. That was the moment, though we didn't know it yet, that our naive notion of a harmless HOA was about to be shattered. Karen's pen scratched against the clipboard with a sound like tearing parchment. She had moved through the bedroom with the grim efficiency of a customs agent, her white glove skimming surfaces, her eyes missing nothing. But when her gaze fell upon the intimate clutter of our new life together, Sarah's suitcase splayed open on the bed, a cascade of her soft sweaters and my worn t-shirts intermingled, the framed photo of her mother smiling from the nightstand. She stopped cold. "I see you have a guest," she stated, her voice flat and definitive. The pen hovered, poised to record the infraction. A knot tightened in my stomach. "Not a guest," I corrected, my tone firmer now. "My wife. Sarah lives here. This is her home." Karen offered a thin, condescending smile that didn't reach her wintry eyes. The HOA bylaws, Section 4.12, clearly state that any permanent resident not listed on the original deed must be submitted for board approval prior to occupancy. She recited it by rote, a mantra of control. A background check, credit report, and an interview are required. We need to maintain the community's character, you understand. Sarah, who had been quietly fuming, finally spoke. Her voice was low, laced with a disbelief that was rapidly curdling into anger. "You need to approve me? To live with my own husband." She gestured to the marriage certificate we had propped on the dresser, its shiny new seal gleaming. "What exactly is in that character we might ruin?" "It's procedure, dear. For all we know, you could be a disruptive element." Karen's gaze deliberately drifted to the vibrant ink of the floral tattoos trailing down Sarah's arm, a mark of the creativity and independence I loved. "We have standards. You'll need to vacate until the approval process is complete. It usually takes 4 to 6 weeks. The audacity of the demand left us speechless. She stood in the heart of our home, amidst the evidence of our shared life, and told my wife she was an unauthorized item, like a misplaced trash can. The email I sent was polite but firm, citing the Fair Housing Act and basic human decency. The response from the HOA board, undoubtedly penned by Karen, was a masterclass in bureaucratic stonewalling. A terse, copied and pasted paragraph from the bylaws, with Section 4.12 highlighted as if it were a holy scripture. Sarah, trying to settle into her new home office, found the atmosphere increasingly suffocating. Every time she stepped onto the small back patio for a breath of air or sat on the front steps to take a work call, she would feel it, the prickle on the back of her neck, a glimpse of a khaki vest through a window across the street, the subtle parting of a blind. She was under constant surveillance, a prisoner in her own home. On the third morning, the standoff escalated. Seeking a change of scenery from the unpacked boxes, Sarah took her laptop and coffee to the front porch. The morning was cool and quiet, the only sound the chirping of birds and the soft tap of her keys. It was a peaceful moment, until the shadow fell over her screen. Karen stood on the sidewalk, her clipboard held tight. Unauthorized commercial activity, Karen declared, pointing a manicured finger at the laptop as if it were a contraband weapon. Sarah took a slow, deliberate sip of her coffee. I'm drinking coffee and checking my email, Karen. It's called living. The bylaws prohibit operating a business from the premises. That, she said, her voice dripping with accusation, looks like a business to me. I'm issuing a fine, and you are still an unapproved occupant. I must insist you leave the property immediately. Sarah looked up, meeting Karen's gaze squarely. The last of her patience evaporated. I'm not going anywhere, Karen. The words were quiet, but final, a line drawn in the sand of their manicured lawn. Karen's lips pressed into a bloodless line. We'll see about that. She pulled her cell phone from her vest pocket, her thumb stabbing at the screen with venomous precision. The 20-minute wait felt like an hour, thick with tense silence broken only by the rustle of a leaf blower a few houses down. Karen stood sentinel on the sidewalk, arms crossed, a portrait of righteous vindication. Sarah remained on the porch step, her laptop closed beside her, her posture not of defiance, but of quiet, unshakable certainty. I stood in the doorway, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, a low simmer of anger in my veins. When the patrol car finally glided to a stop, its arrival was anticlimactic, devoid of the sirens Karen had likely hoped for. 2 officers emerged, one older with a weary, experienced face and the name Miller on his chest, and a younger one who looked like he was still figuring things out. Karen sprang into action before their doors were fully shut. Officers, thank you for coming. This woman is trespassing, she announced, pointing a dramatic finger at Sarah. She is refusing to leave the property, and I am the HOA president. She is not an approved resident. Officer Miller's eyes, looking tired of the world's petty dramas, slid from Karen's triumphant face to Sarah, who sat calmly on her own porch step, then to me, standing in the doorway of my own home. Ma'am, Officer Miller said, his voice a deep, calm baritone directed at Sarah. Can you confirm your identity and your connection to this residence? This is my home, Sarah said, her voice clear and steady. I live here with my husband. We moved in 3 days ago. But she is not on the deed, Karen interjected, her voice rising an octave. She is an unapproved resident. She has to go. Officer Miller let out a long, slow breath, the sound of a man who had navigated this particular brand of insanity before. Ma'am, he said, turning to Karen with practiced patience. This is a civil matter. We can't remove someone from their own home based on an HOA rule. That's not a police matter. The sputter of indignation that escaped Karen's lips was almost comical. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. But the bylaws. She's violating the bylaws. The sputter of indignation that escaped Karen's lips was almost comical. Her face flushed a deep, mottled red. But the bylaws. She's violating the bylaws, she insisted, her voice climbing into a register of pure frustration. Officer Miller simply gave a slow, weary shake of his head, about to reiterate his point, when the sleek, black sedan pulled up silently behind his patrol car. Every head turned, the driver's door opened, and a woman in a razor-sharp pinstriped suit emerged, her presence slicing through the suburban scene like a laser. She carried a leather-bound briefcase that looked both expensive and heavy, and her heels made a decisive click-clack on the asphalt that commanded attention. For a moment, Karen looked momentarily hopeful, perhaps thinking this was some form of HOA-backed reinforcement. But then Sarah stood. The tense, defensive posture she had held for days melted away, replaced by a cool, focused calm. She walked down the porch steps, past a utterly stunned Karen, and embraced the woman in the suit. Aunt Celia, she said, her voice thick with a mixture of relief and resolve. Thank you for coming. Of course, sweetheart. Celia's voice was like polished steel, warm for her niece but carrying an edge that promised trouble for others. She turned to the officers, flashing a bar card with a practiced flick of her wrist. Celia Vance of Vance and Associates. I'm here as Ms. Henderson's legal counsel. Karen's jaw went slack. Legal counsel? What is this? She managed, the confidence in her voice cracking. Celia turned her sharp, intelligent gaze on Karen, and for the first time, the HOA president seemed to shrink. Karen Breckenridge? She asked, though it was clear she knew the answer. You've been served. The thick, legal-sized envelope seemed to materialize in Celia's hand. She offered it to Karen, who took it reflexively, her fingers closing around the crisp paper as if it were a venomous snake. Her eyes were wide, darting from the document to Celia's impassive face, trying to process this sudden inversion of her reality. What is this? Karen's voice was a whisper, all its prior bluster gone. That is a formal notice to commence legal action, Celia announced, her voice projecting to ensure the gathering neighbors and the officers could hear. On behalf of my client, Sarah Henderson, we are suing you, personally, and the Willow Creek HOA for harassment, violation of the Fair Housing Act, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a series of other delectable counts detailed therein. The suggested damages are quite substantial. She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a guillotine blade. A murmur rippled through the small crowd on the lawns. But more immediately, Celia continued, her tone shifting to one of cold, procedural clarity. As the owner of this property, and pursuant to the state's nuisance laws, my client is evicting you. Evicting me? Karen shrieked, the sound tearing from her throat. I don't live here. This is absurd. Correction, Sarah said, stepping forward. She was no longer the quiet new wife. She was a force, her voice steady and clear. You live at 1423 Willow Creek Lane. The HOA management office is not a separate, zoned commercial property. It is a converted garage in your own home. Your constant, unannounced, and harassing visits to our property constitute you bringing your business, a nuisance business, onto our private residence. Therefore, you are trespassing in the course of your business. Consider this your 24-hour notice to cease and desist all HOA operations from that location or face further legal action for operating a commercial enterprise in a residential zone without a permit. The precision of the strike was devastating. The precision of the strike was devastating.
Karen's face intervent a rapid, horrifying transformation.
The initial flush of outrage drained away, leaving a sickly, parchment-white pallor. Her mouth worked soundlessly, her eyes wide with the dawning, gut-wrenching understanding that she had not just lost a battle, but had triggered a total war she was catastrophically unprepared to fight. The eviction notice and lawsuit papers trembled violently in her hand, the crisp legal documents seeming to mock the rigid authority of her own beloved clipboard. You can't do this, she whispered, the words a ragged breath, devoid of any of her former power. It was no longer a declaration, but a plea. The paperwork is quite in order, Celia replied, her voice cool and professional, a sharp contrast to Karen's unraveling composure. I'd advise you to contact your own attorney. Immediately. You should be aware that the HOA's directors and officers' insurance may not cover you for personal liability in a harassment suit. This could become very expensive for you. The officers, who had been observing the legal theater with neutral expressions, finally allowed a hint of their amusement to show. Officer Miller tipped his cap to Sarah and me, a faint smile playing on his lips. Looks like you folks have it handled from here. You have a good day now. As the patrol car pulled away, the dam of silence broke among the neighbors. A man from down the street, whose lawn had been cited for being half an inch too long, started to clap. It was slow, deliberate, and isolating at first. Then, from another porch, another pair of hands joined in. Then another. It wasn't a roaring ovation, but a steady, percussive acknowledgement of a tyrant's fall. Karen stood frozen in the center of it, the humiliating applause washing over her, the weight of her own rules finally crushing her. The resignation letter from Karen Breckenridge was terse and devoid of apology, but it was a surrender nonetheless. The lawsuit was settled with stunning speed. The HOA's insurance company, faced with Celia's formidable reputation and a damning list of evidence, compelled the board to agree to a complete overhaul of the most draconian bylaws. The infamous resident approval clause was not just suspended. It was permanently excised, its discriminatory potential laid bare for all to see. Sarah's name was added to the deed in a quiet, administrative ceremony that felt more meaningful than the entire approval process would have been. We learned through the neighborhood gossip network that Karen had been forced to rent a small, characterless office in a distant strip mall to run the dwindling HOA affairs. The monthly rent a constant, bitter reminder of her overreach. The eyesore of her comings and goings was now conveniently removed from Willow Creek Lane. That evening, Sarah and I sat on our porch, our approved, regulation-friendly, but now truly ours porch. The air was sweet with the smell of cut grass and grilling from a neighbor's yard. Fireflies pulsed like tiny, wandering stars over the lawns, their light unchallenged by any glaring porch lights turned on too early. "You know," I said, lacing my fingers with Sarah's, "when you told me your aunt was a pit bull in heels, I thought you were exaggerating." Sarah laughed, the sound warm and full in the twilight, a sound that now belonged here. "I told you I had a plan. Nobody threatens my home." She leaned her head on my shoulder, the weight of it familiar and right. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, not with the silence of enforced rules, but with the gentle hum of lives being lived freely. We had fought our first battle as a married couple, and we had won more than just the house. We had won the right to truly, and without permission, call it our home.